The town of Copper Ridge offered bits and jeers for Mercy Whitfield, the baker's daughter left destitute and shamed on the auction block. They saw a burden. But from the edge of the crowd, the legendary mountain man, Isaiah McKinnon, saw something else. He didn't offer coins. He emptied a year's worth of furs and a pouch of gold dust onto the table. In the stunned silence that followed, he didn't just buy a wife, he bought a future, leaving the entire town to wonder what a man who lived in silence could possibly want with the woman they had so loudly scorned. When the reckoning comes and the powerful arrive with guns blazing, who will beg for mercy from those they once destroyed, every story brings us a little closer together. Before we dive in, drop a comment with where you're tuning in from. It's a joy to see how far this family of listeners reaches. The crisp October morning painted Copper Ridge in golden hues as townspeople gathered in the square. Fallen leaves skittered across the wooden platform where Mercy Whitfield stood, her shoulders hunched against the autumn wind and the piercing stares of the crowd. The annual spinster auction had drawn nearly every soul in the Wyoming Territory town, though not all came with honorable intentions. Mercy's plain brown dress hung loose on her frame, a testament to the months of hardship since her father's passing. She kept her eyes downcast, unable to meet the mocking gazes below. The same folks who'd once praised her father's fresh-baked bread now whispered and snickered behind raised hands. "Reckon she ate all them profits cut," someone called out, drawing cruel laughter from the crowd. The auctioneer, Tom Bradford, adjusted his vest and cleared his throat. "Now then, who will start the bidding for Miss Whitfield?" His voice carried across the square, mixing with the distant cry of geese heading south. "2 bits," came a jeering call. "4 bits if she comes with a reinforced wagon." Another burst of laughter rippled through the crowd. Mercy's cheeks burned, but she stood straight, dignity being all she had left. Her father's final illness had consumed their savings, leaving her with nothing but memories of better days and the bitter taste of charity. The commotion at the edge of the crowd drew everyone's attention. Isaiah McKinnon's tall figure cut through the gathering like a knife through butter. Dust from the trail still clung to his buckskins, and his long rifle rested easily in the crook of his arm. The usually bustling square fell silent as he approached. McKinnon was a legend in these parts, though few could claim to know him well. He appeared once a month to trade furs and replenish supplies, speaking little and leaving quickly. Stories of his prowess as a mountain man and tracker circulated in whispers around evening fires. He stopped at the front of the crowd, his weathered face unreadable beneath his beard. His eyes sharp as a hawk's took in the scene before him. The silence stretched thin as a fiddle string. Bradford shifted uncomfortably on the platform. "Well then, do I hear 50 cents for I'll bid?" McKinnon's voice was rough from disuse, but carried clearly across the square. He stepped forward, shrugging off his pack. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Isaiah McKinnon, the lone wolf of the mountains, bidding at the spinster auction. Several people laughed nervously, uncertain if this was some kind of joke. Without ceremony, McKinnon upended his pack on the wooden table beside the platform. Out tumbled prime beaver pelts, marten furs, and a leather pouch that clinked heavily with gold dust. The crowd gasped at the wealth displayed before them. A year's worth of prime furs, McKinnon stated flatly, and gold dust to match. Bradford's eyes widened as he examined the offering. The value was clear to everyone present. It was more than any 3 brides had gone for in previous auctions combined. "Isaiah's gone soft in the head," someone called from the back. Mountaineers finally addled his brain. Another voice joined in. McKinnon stood unmoved, his gaze steady on Bradford. The auctioneer licked his lips nervously, looking between the fortune on his table and the fearsome mountain man. Any other bids?" Bradford's voice cracked slightly. The crowd shuffled, but no one spoke. Even the previous mockers fell silent, unwilling to challenge McKinnon's offer. Going once. Bradford's hammer hovered. Going twice. The square was silent, save for the whisper of wind through the cottonwoods. "Sold to Mr. Isaiah McKinnon?" Mercy stood frozen as McKinnon approached the platform, his boots heavy on the wooden steps. She raised her eyes to meet his, her face a mixture of terror and resignation. The man before her was more legend than flesh, and now she belonged to him. Her hands trembled slightly as she clasped them together, wondering what fate awaited her in the mountain wilderness with this stranger who had just paid a fortune to own her. McKinnon stopped before her. his presence blocking out the staring crowd. Up close, she could see the lines around his eyes carved by years of squinting into mountain winds. His beard couldn't hide the firm set of his jaw, but there was something in his gaze that didn't match his fearsome reputation, a glimmer of something that might have been kindness. Isaiah McKinnon extended his callous hand toward Mercy, who still stood trembling on the auction platform. The morning sun cast long shadows across the town square, as curious onlookers pressed closer, eager to witness more of the unexpected drama unfolding before them. "Easy now," Isaiah said softly, his voice barely carrying beyond the platform. "Watch your step here." Mercy hesitated for a moment before accepting his help, her fingers cold against his weathered palm. The wooden steps creaked as she descended, her eyes still downcast and shoulders hunched against the continued whispers and snickers from the crowd. Once they reached level ground, Isaiah took a step back, creating a respectful distance between them. He cleared his throat, speaking just loud enough for her to hear over the murmuring crowd. "Miss Whitfield, I want you to know something right off. You're free to go wherever you please. I only bid to stop." He gestured vaguely at the platform, his jaw tightening. "Well, to stop what was happening up there." Mercy's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Free?" The word came out as barely more than a whisper. Isaiah nodded solemnly. "Yes, ma'am. Though if you've nowhere else to go, I've got a cabin up in the mountains. It's simple, but it's warm and dry. You'd be welcome to stay through the winter, and come spring, I'll help you get to Denver for a fresh start." The unexpected kindness in his words broke something loose inside Mercy. Months of humiliation, grief, and lonely struggles welled up all at once. Tears spilled down her cheeks as her shoulders shook with silent sobs. "Well, ain't that touching?" A sharp voice cut through the moment. Jeremiah Hagens, the town banker, stepped forward from the crowd, his expensive suit marking him apart from the other townspeople. "McKinnon's gone and wasted good money on damaged goods. Reckon even mountain men get addled in the head sometimes." Cruel laughter rippled through the gathering. Isaiah's hand tightened on his rifle strap, but he kept his voice steady. "Your opinion ain't been asked for, Hodgins. Just looking out for a fellow businessman." Hodgins sneered. "Though I suppose you mountain folk ain't too particular about value for money?" From her doorway across the square, Clara Jensen watched the scene unfold. One hand pressed against her throat. Her two small children clung to her skirts, their eyes wide at the commotion. She took half a step forward, wanting to speak up to defend Mercy, who had always slipped extra roles to her children when times were lean. But the weight of social expectations and her own precarious position in the community held her back. She retreated into her doorway, shame burning in her chest. "Best we get moving," Isaiah said quietly to Mercy. "My wagon's just over there. Do you have belongings to collect?" Mercy wiped her eyes with trembling fingers. "Just one trunk at the boarding house. Everything else had to be sold." They walked together to the boarding house, followed by catcalls about the mismatched pair. Isaiah's long strides shortened to match Mercy's pace, his presence providing a buffer between her and the townsfolk's cruel commentary. The trunk proved to be small and light, a testament to how much Mercy had already lost. Isaiah lifted it easily into his wagon, then helped Mercy up onto the wooden seat. More townspeople gathered to watch their departure, their whispers and pointing making no pretense at discretion. "Reckon the mountain man's finally found himself a woman big enough to survive the winter," someone shouted, drawing fresh laughter from the crowd. Isaiah climbed up beside Mercy and took up the reins. With a gentle click of his tongue, he urged the horses forward, leaving behind the jeering voices and pointing fingers. The wagon wheels creaked as they turned onto the mountain trail, the sounds of the town gradually fading behind them. Mercy sat quietly beside him, her hands folded in her lap, still processing the dramatic turn her life had taken. After months of cruel treatment and degradation, a stranger had shown her more kindness in a few minutes than she'd experienced since her father's death. The weight of it sat heavy in her chest, a mixture of gratitude and disbelief that threatened fresh tears. The wagon climbed slowly up the mountain trail each turn, taking them further from the spite and malice of Copper Ridge. Aspen leaves shimmered gold against the blue October sky, and a cool breeze carried the scent of pine from the heights above. Mercy stole occasional glances at the quiet man beside her, wondering what sort of person would spend a fortune just to spare a stranger from humiliation. The wagon creaked steadily upward as the sun traced its arc across the autumn sky. Isaiah guided the horses with practiced ease along the winding mountain trail, while Mercy sat quietly beside him, lost in her own thoughts. The only sounds were the clip-clop of hooves, the gentle jingling of harness, and the occasional cry of a hawk soaring overhead. When they approached particularly rough stretches, Isaiah would break his respectful silence. "Might want to hold tight here," he'd say softly, "or this next part's a mite bumpy." Once as they rounded a bend, he pointed to a distant peak. "That there's Medicine Bow. She'll be wearing her first snow cap soon enough." The terrain changed as they climbed higher into the foothills. Aspens gave way to sturdy pines, their branches swaying in the mountain breeze. The air grew cooler and clearer with each mile gained. Mercy pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders, watching the landscape transform around them. As the afternoon light began to soften toward evening, Isaiah guided the wagon around one final bend. "Home's just ahead," he said simply. Mercy's eyes widened as the homestead came into view. Instead of the crude trapper's cabin she'd expected, a proper log house stood in a natural clearing. Its sturdy walls and peaked roof, speaking of careful craftsmanship. Glass windows, real glass, not oiled paper, caught the fading sunlight. A stone chimney rose from the roof and smoke curled invitingly from its top. Several well-maintained outbuildings surrounded the main house, a barn, a workshop, and what appeared to be a small chapel. Isaiah brought the wagon to a stop near the house. "Let me help you down," he offered, extending his hand. Once Mercy was safely on the ground, he lifted her trunk with ease. "I'll show you where you'll be staying." Inside, the house was just as surprising as its exterior. Clean plank floors stretched beneath their feet, and a stone fireplace dominated one wall of the main room. Carved furniture, a table, chairs, and a sideboard showed evidence of skilled hands and attention to detail. Shelves lined with books covered another wall, their leather spines well worn from use. Isaiah led her to a door off the main room. "This will be your room," he said, setting down her trunk. "There's fresh linens in the chest, and the washstand's got clean water." Mercy stepped inside, amazed to find not just a bed, but a real bedroom. A handmade quilt in shades of blue and cream covered the bed, and curtains framed the window. The washstand held a china basin and pitcher, and a small mirror hung above it. "I know it ain't much," Isaiah said, shifting his weight uncomfortably. "Built this place thinking maybe someday." He trailed off, then cleared his throat. "Well, I'll go tend to the horses. Make yourself at home." After he left, Mercy explored her new surroundings. Every room showed the same care and craftsmanship. The kitchen particularly caught her attention. Well-stocked shelves held flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples. Strings of dried herbs hung from the rafters, and rows of preserves lined the pantry shelves. Looking at the bounty before her, Mercy felt a surge of purpose. Cooking had always been her refuge, her way of showing care for others. Here was something she could do to repay Isaiah's kindness. She set to work with familiar motions, mixing bread dough and setting it to rise near the stove's warmth. She found potatoes in the root cellar and salt pork in the pantry. Soon the kitchen filled with the homey smells of baking bread and simmering stew. When Isaiah returned from the barn, he stopped short in the doorway. The table was set with two places, steam rising from bowls of hot stew. Fresh bread, golden brown and crusty, waited to be sliced. "Didn't expect," he began, then fell silent, clearly moved by this simple act of domesticity. "It's the least I could do," Mercy said softly, "to thank you." They sat down together, the silence between them, now comfortable rather than strained. Through the windows they could see the first stars appearing in the deepening blue of the mountain sky. Each lost in their own thoughts, they shared their first meal together in the home Isaiah had built with such hope, a hope that perhaps hadn't been in vain after all. The mountain homestead settled into a comfortable rhythm as October days slipped past. Each morning, while darkness still cloaked the peaks, Isaiah would rise to check his trap lines and hunt. Mercy would wake to find the kitchen fire already stoked, a kettle of fresh coffee waiting on the stove. She filled her days transforming Isaiah's well-stocked pantry into meals that brought a gleam of appreciation to his eyes. The scent of fresh baked bread became a constant in the house, along with hearty stews, fruit pies, and preserves that lined the shelves in neat rows. Her hands remembered their old skill, finding joy in the familiar motions of kneading dough and chopping vegetables. Their evening meals began in the same quiet way as that first night. but gradually conversation bloomed between them. Isaiah, though still reserved, would share stories of his days hunting or comment on changes in the weather. His dry observations often carried an unexpected humor that caught Mercy by surprise, drawing genuine laughter from her for the first time in months. "Caught that old fox watching me check the trap line today," he said one evening, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Reckon he was taking notes trying to figure out my route." Mercy found herself responding with her own gentle wit. "Perhaps we should invite him to dinner, seeing as he's taking such an interest in your work." These simple exchanges, free from mockery or cruel intent, began healing something deep within her. Isaiah's consistent kindness and respect acted like a balm on old wounds. He never commented on her size, never made her feel less than welcome in his home. When she spoke, he listened with genuine attention, treating her thoughts and opinions with consideration. The peace of their routine was shattered one afternoon when Isaiah returned early from his monthly supply run to town. Mercy heard the wagon approaching and went to meet him, but stopped short at the troubled expression on his face. "Something's wrong in the valley?" he said, climbing down from the wagon. His usual calm demeanor was disturbed, jaw tight with concern. "Banker Hodgins is foreclosing on farms left and right, claiming folks have defaulted on their loans due to the drought." Mercy helped him unload supplies as he continued. "There's a railroad man, Thaddeus Morrison, buying up all the foreclosed properties for next to nothing. The Jensen family's facing eviction, along with several others. Clara Jensen's got those two little ones to think about, and winter coming on fast." They carried the supplies into the kitchen where Mercy had beef stew simmering on the stove. Isaiah sank into a chair at the table, running a hand through his graying hair. "The old-timers in town are predicting a harsh winter earlier than usual. The Arapjo people down in the valley are saying the same." As if nature herself had been listening, the first snowflakes began drifting past the kitchen window. They both moved to look outside, watching as the flakes grew larger and fell faster, creating a white curtain across the darkening sky. "This is too early," Mercy whispered, pressing her hand against the cold glass. "Those families down there." "Weeks too early," Isaiah agreed grimly. "And from the look of those clouds, this ain't no light dusting." They stood in silence, watching the snow accumulate on the ground. The wind picked up, driving the flakes sideways and rattling the window panes. Within an hour, the world outside was transformed into a sea of white, the familiar shapes of the barn and workshop becoming indistinct in the growing storm. Mercy moved to stir the stew, her mind on Clara Jensen and her children. She'd seen them that day at the auction, remembered the sympathy in Clara's eyes. Now they faced losing their home just as winter descended. "This storm will trap us up here for months," Isaiah said, still watching the swirling snow. "No way to get down to the valley until the spring thaw." The fire crackled in the stove, and the savory smell of stew filled the warm kitchen, but neither brought the comfort they usually did. Outside, the early winter storm raged on, while below, in the valley, desperate families faced an uncertain future. The peaceful routine Mercy and Isaiah had built seemed suddenly fragile against the gathering darkness of both weather and human greed. The blizzard's fury held them captive for 3 long days. Wind howled through the mountain peaks, piling snow and drifts, taller than a man against the homestead's walls. Inside, the fire crackled steadily in the hearth, casting warm light across the main room, where Mercy and Isaiah found themselves spending more time together than either had expected. On the second evening, as Mercy stirred a pot of beans and salt pork, she broke their comfortable silence. "My mother would have known exactly how to handle being snowed in like this," she said softly. She managed kitchens for entire logging camps, sometimes feeding hundreds of men 3 meals a day. Isaiah looked up from where he sat, cleaning his rifle. "That's quite a task." "She taught me everything she knew," Mercy continued, adding a pinch of dried herbs to the pot. "How to scale recipes for large groups, how to preserve food so nothing went to waste, how to keep supplies organized through long winters." Her eyes grew distant with memory. "After she passed, I used those skills helping Papa with his bakery. We didn't just make bread. We supplied preserved goods to travelers, work camps, anyone passing through the territory." She paused, her stirring slowing. "We were doing well until Papa got sick. Consumption takes so long and the doctors cost so much." Her voice trailed off. But Isaiah understood. He'd seen how illness could drain not just life, but savings too. "I lost my family to cholera back in Ohio," Isaiah said quietly, surprising himself with the admission. He hadn't spoken of them in years. Came west afterward, thinking I wanted nothing but solitude. Mercy turned from the stove, noting how his weathered hands had stilled on the rifle. "But you built this place," she said, gesturing to the well-crafted home around them. "This isn't a hermit's cabin." "No." Isaiah agreed, a faint smile touching his lips. "Reckon I always hoped to build something lasting, something more than just shelter." The next morning, despite the continuing storm, they ventured to Isaiah's smokehouse, where quarters of elk and deer hung waiting to be processed. Mercy surveyed the meat with an expert's eye. "We could preserve this to last months," she said, already rolling up her sleeves. "I'll show you how." Throughout the day, she taught Isaiah proper smoking techniques he'd never known, showed him how to prepare pemmican that would keep through the hardest winter, and demonstrated ways to turn tough meat into tender stews that could feed a dozen hungry mouths. "See how the fat renders down," she explained, stirring a pot of stew. "That's what gives it staying power. Add dried berries and roots, and it becomes a complete meal." Isaiah watched in amazement as she transformed his simple stores into an abundance of preserved food. Her hands moved with confident efficiency, wasting nothing, creating more from their supplies than he would have thought possible. When the storm finally broke on the fourth morning, they stood together on the front porch. The world had been transformed into a pristine expanse of white unbroken, save for the dark shapes of pine trees. Below, the valley lay buried under feet of snow, early winter, gripping the land months before anyone had prepared for it. "Those families down there," Mercy said, her breath clouding in the crisp air. "The Jensen and the others facing foreclosure, they won't be ready for this." Isaiah nodded grimly. "Most won't have laid in enough supplies, expecting another month of fall weather." Mercy turned to face him, her expression determined. "We could help them." "Help them," Isaiah's brow furrowed. "The same folks who mocked me at the auction." "Yes." Mercy's voice was firm. "Their cruelty came from their own fears and struggles. But those children down there don't deserve to go hungry because of it." She gestured to their smokehouse, now filled with properly preserved meat. "Between your hunting skills and what I know about food preservation and large-scale cooking, we could help them survive this winter. We have the knowledge they need." Isaiah studied her face, seeing not the frightened woman from the auction platform, but someone strong and capable, whose heart held no room for bitterness. Despite everything she'd endured here, she stood proposing to help the very people who had humiliated her. "You're a remarkable woman, Mercy Whitfield," he said softly. A faint blush colored her cheeks, but her gaze remained steady. "Will you help me help them?" The mountain air grew sharper as winter settled in, but Isaiah and Mercy's resolve only strengthened. They rose before dawn each day, driven by their secret mission to help the struggling families below. Isaiah ventured out in the pre-dawn darkness, tracking deer and elk through the deep snow. His expertise showed in how efficiently he worked, taking down game with clean shots that preserved the meat quality Mercy would need. Mercy transformed their kitchen into a preservation workshop. The brick oven blazed constantly as she baked loaf after loaf of hearty bread. Every available surface held jars of preserved vegetables from Isaiah's root cellar, and dried herbs hung from the rafters. The smokehouse worked overtime, strips of venison and elk meat curing in the cold air. "We'll need more salt," Isaiah mentioned one evening, watching Mercy prepare another batch of preserved meat. She nodded, not breaking her rhythm as she worked. "And more flour soon," she added. "But look what we've managed already." She gestured to the rows of prepared food packages, each wrapped carefully in oilcloth and burlap. Their first delivery target was the Jensen family. Isaiah had scouted their homestead during his evening rounds, his heart heavy at what he'd seen through their window. "The children look like winter birds," he told Mercy, "all eyes and hollow bones. CL tries to hide it, but they're desperate." Mercy's hands still on her work. "Then they'll be our first," she said firmly. In the deepest part of night, Isaiah hitched up the wagon while Mercy gathered their carefully prepared packages. They worked in comfortable silence, moving like shadows through the snow. The valley lay quiet under a blanket of stars as they made their way down the mountain trail. At the Jensen homestead, they left a generous bundle on the front porch: smoked meat preserves, bread still fresh from Mercy's oven, and root vegetables from Isaiah's cellar. Mercy tucked a simple note among the provisions: "From neighbors who care." They watched from the trees at dawn as Clara discovered the package. She fell to her knees beside it, shoulders shaking with relief. Inside, they could hear her children's excited voices as they found the food. "Look at their faces," Mercy whispered, squeezing Isaiah's arm. He covered her hand with his own, both of them, sharing the quiet joy of their secret gift. That first success launched weeks of similar missions. Isaiah's nightly scouting revealed which families needed help most urgently. They developed a system marking households on a rough map. The elderly couple whose chimney barely smoked, suggesting they were low on firewood. The widow with 5 children whose wash line held increasingly patched clothes. The family whose father had been injured in a logging accident. Each night brought new deliveries, their wagon moving silently through the snow. They left no traces except their simple notes in the life-sustaining provisions. The work exhausted them, but neither complained. They found deep satisfaction in their shared purpose. Mercy's skills proved invaluable. She could turn Isaiah's hunting success into meals that would feed families for days. Her preserved meats lasted weeks without spoiling. The stews she prepared could be easily reheated, providing multiple meals from a single pot. Isaiah marveled at her expertise. "You've turned this mountain man's cabin into a proper commissary," he said one evening, watching her organize another delivery. She smiled, pleased. "And you've become quite the procurement specialist," she teased gently. "I never knew one man could bring in so much game." Their partnership deepened through the shared work. Gone was the awkwardness of their first days together. They moved in natural rhythm now, anticipating each other's needs, sharing tasks without discussion. Isaiah found himself looking forward to their evening planning sessions, while Mercy came to rely on his quiet strength and unwavering support. One particularly successful evening, after delivering food to 3 desperate families, they sat together by the fire sharing tea. The warmth of the hearth matched the glow of satisfaction they both felt. Isaiah watched Mercy's face in the firelight, seeing not the frightened woman from the auction block, but a strong, compassionate partner who had helped him find purpose beyond his solitary existence. Mercy caught his glance and smiled, understanding in her eyes. She had found her own healing in their work, her talents now used in service to others instead of being mocked by them. Together they had created something meaningful, something larger than themselves. They sat in comfortable silence, sipping their tea, both feeling more content than either had in years. Outside, snow fell softly on the mountain, but inside their home, warmth and purpose filled every corner. The December winds howled across Copper Ridge Valley, but they couldn't drown out the whispers of hope spreading through the community. More mysterious packages appeared on doorsteps each week, filled with preserved meats, fresh bread, and hearty vegetables. The desperate families who received these gifts found themselves sharing stories in hushed tones about their unknown benefactors. "It has to be them up there on the mountain," Mrs. Henderson whispered to Clara Jensen after church one Sunday. "Nobody else could manage such bounty in this harsh winter." Clara nodded, watching her children play with renewed energy. Their hollow cheeks had filled out, and their eyes sparkled again thanks to the regular deliveries of food. She thought about the mountain man and the woman he'd rescued from that horrible auction, the same woman they'd all mocked so cruelly. After a sleepless night of wrestling with her conscience, Clara made her decision. The next morning she hitched her wagon despite the bitter cold and began the treacherous journey up the mountain trail. The wind cut through her heaviest coat as she urged her horses higher, the wagon wheels crunching through fresh snow. When she finally reached Isaiah's homestead, she found him outside chopping wood, his axe rising and falling in a steady rhythm. Mercy hung laundry on a line stretched between 2 posts, her thick, mittened hands working quickly in the freezing air. They both turned at the sound of Clara's approach. Clara climbed down from her wagon, her legs trembling from cold and emotion. Tears froze on her cheeks as she walked toward them. "I know it's been you," she said, her voice breaking. "The food that preserves everything. You've been saving our families all these weeks." Mercy stopped, her work clothes spin still in hand. Isaiah set down his axe and stood quietly watching. "My children would have," Clara's voice caught. "We would have starved without your help. And after how we treated you at that auction," she covered her face with her hands, shoulders shaking. Mercy crossed the snow-covered yard and gently took Clara's arm. "Come inside where it's warm," she said softly. "I've just made fresh coffee." That visit broke down the first wall. Over the next few days, more families found the courage to make the journey up the mountain. The Hendersons arrived next, their elderly father wrapped in every blanket they owned. P would have wasted away without your help, their eldest son admitted, hat in hand, as he stood in Isaiah and Mercy's kitchen. The Williams family came the following day, supporting their pregnant daughter, Sarah, who desperately needed the nourishing food they'd been receiving. "We don't deserve your kindness," Mrs. Williams said, tears in her eyes as she looked at Mercy. "The things we said that day in town." But Mercy welcomed each visitor with the same gentle grace, serving hot coffee and slices of fresh bread, still warm from the oven. Isaiah stood quietly by, accepting their gratitude with simple nods, though Mercy noticed how his eyes softened at each sincere apology. Word spread through the valley about the warm welcome visitors received at the mountain homestead. Families began arriving in small groups, bringing what little they could share: a precious cup of sugar, a handful of dried apples, a carefully preserved jar of jam. More importantly, they brought their regret for past cruelty and their genuine gratitude. The transformation culminated in an impromptu gathering one snowy afternoon. The Jensens, Hendersons, and Williams all arrived within hours of each other. Instead of sending them home in the threatening weather, Mercy suggested they stay for a meal together. She and Clara worked side by side in the kitchen, preparing a hearty stew, while Isaiah and the other men exchanged news about winter grazing conditions. Children played quietly in corners, sharing toys and books from Isaiah's shelves. The elderly Henderson patriarch told stories about the valley's early days to a rapt audience gathered near the fire. The large table that Isaiah had built years ago, hoping to someday fill it with family, finally served its intended purpose. Mercy's stew and fresh bread fed them all as conversation and laughter filled the once quiet house. The barriers of pride and prejudice that had divided them began to crumble over shared food and warm fellowship. As the afternoon light faded, Mercy looked around the crowded room. At Isaiah quietly discussing spring planting with Mr. Jensen, at Clara teaching young Sarah Williams her secret for perfect pie crust, at the children playing together without care for whose family they belonged to. The mountain home she and Isaiah had turned into a secret commissary had become something more, a gathering place where healing could begin. January settled over the mountain homestead like a thick white blanket, but the warmth inside Isaiah and Mercy's home kept the winter's chill at bay. What had begun as secret food deliveries had transformed into regular gatherings that filled their large main room with laughter and conversation. Every Sunday afternoon, families trudged through the snow bearing whatever modest contributions they could manage. A precious jar of preserves, a handful of dried herbs, or simply willing hands to help with endless winter tasks. The isolation that usually marked the harsh mountain winters had given way to something new. Children who once avoided each other in town now played together on Isaiah's hearthrug, while their parents shared coffee and conversation around the big table. The Henderson stories of early settlement days became weekly entertainment, with even the youngest listeners gathering close to hear tales of the valley's history. Through it all, Isaiah and Mercy moved in quiet harmony. She noticed how his gruff exterior softened when helping Mr. Jensen repair a broken sledge, or when showing the children how to identify animal tracks in the snow. He watched her welcome each visitor with genuine warmth, marveling at how she could forgive so completely those who had once treated her with such cruelty. One evening, after the last visitors had departed and the dishes were dried, they sat together by the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls as Isaiah worked on mending a pair of snowshoes. Mercy darned socks, her needle flashing in the firelight. "Mercy," Isaiah said suddenly, setting aside his work. His voice carried an unfamiliar tremor. "I reckon I ain't much good at fancy words." She looked up, her hands going still in her lap as she caught the serious look in his eyes. "But I built this place hoping someday it might be more than just shelter." He stood and crossed to the fireplace, running his hand along the sturdy mantel he had carved years ago. "Built that chapel out back too, thinking maybe the good Lord had plans I couldn't see yet." Mercy's heart began to race as Isaiah turned to face her, his expression earnest and vulnerable. "I never reckoned on finding someone like you," he continued softly. "Someone with such strength and kindness in her heart. Someone who could make this house into the home I always hoped it might be." He knelt awkwardly beside her chair. "Would you consider making it official, being my wife proper?" Like tears spilled down Mercy's cheeks as she reached for his weathered hands. "Yes," she whispered. "Oh, yes." The news spread quickly through their mountain community. Clara Jensen immediately offered to help Mercy alter her mother's preserved wedding dress, carefully stored in tissue paper. These many years, the Hendersons' eldest daughter contributed a length of lace she had been saving for her own wedding day. Other families brought small gifts, embroidered linens, preserved flowers, bits of ribbon. Reverend Samuel Morrison, who served the scattered mountain communities, agreed to perform the ceremony. He arrived early one bright January morning, his gentle manner so different from his brother Thaddeus's cruel business practices in the valley below. The small chapel Isaiah had built years before stood ready warmed by a pot-bellied stove and decorated with pine boughs. Clara Jensen and her family served as witnesses along with the Hendersons, who had become dear friends through the long winter weeks. Mercy wore her mother's dress, now perfectly altered to fit her fuller figure, with sprigs of dried lavender in her hair. Isaiah had cleaned and pressed his best Sunday suit, his boots polished to a shine. His hands trembled slightly as he placed a simple gold band on Mercy's finger, one he had traded furs to obtain from a traveling merchant. Reverend Morrison's words filled the small chapel with warmth and hope as he spoke of love's power to transform lives and build communities. When he pronounced them husband and wife, the gathered families burst into joyful applause that echoed off the chapel's wooden walls. They celebrated afterward with a feast that showcased their community's new spirit of cooperation. Each family had contributed what they could. Fresh bread from Clara's oven, preserved fruits from the Henderson storehouse, meat from Isaiah's winter hunting, all prepared under Mercy's skilled direction. As evening approached, their guests departed with warm embraces and heartfelt congratulations, leaving the newlyweds alone in their home. Isaiah built up the fire while Mercy brewed fresh coffee, both moving with new awareness of their changed relationship. "Welcome home, Mrs. McKinnon," Isaiah said softly, drawing her close beside the hearth. Mercy leaned into his embrace, finally allowing herself to fully believe in this miracle of love and acceptance. Together they stood in comfortable silence, watching the flames dance and feeling the promise of their future stretch out before them, as vast and bright as the star-filled mountain sky. The crisp February sunshine belied the darkness about to descend on Copper Ridge. Thaddeus Morrison's private railcar rolled into the station amid a cloud of steam and coal smoke, followed by 3 passenger cars filled with his entourage of lawyers and gunmen. The townspeople gathered to watch as Morrison, dressed in an expensive Eastern suit that marked him as distinctly out of place, stepped onto the platform with the air of a conquering general. His hired guns spread through the town like a poison. They moved in groups of 2 or 3, their gun belts worn low and tied down, making their purpose clear without saying a word. Their leader, Jack Steele, stood out from the others. His cold eyes surveyed the town with calculated precision, noting escape routes and defensive positions with the practiced eye of a professional killer. Morrison wasted no time establishing his headquarters in the town's only hotel. Within hours, his lawyers had commandeered the largest meeting room, spreading maps and documents across every available surface. The sound of typewriters clicking and telegraphs chattering filled the air as Morrison's corporate machine ground into motion. The news spread through town like wildfire. Geological surveys had revealed rich mineral deposits in the Medicine Bow Mountains, particularly around Isaiah McKinnon's homestead. Morrison's real purpose became clear when his lawyers began issuing eviction notices. 30 days, they declared. 30 days for families to abandon homes they had built with their own hands, to leave land they had worked for years. These mountain properties were never properly registered, Morrison announced to the gathered townspeople, his voice dripping with false concern. "As a representative of the railroad's interests, it's my duty to ensure federal lands are properly utilized for the greater good of economic progress." The crowd erupted in protest, but the sight of Steele and his men fingering their gun belts quickly restored order. Morrison's smile never reached his eyes as he continued. "Of course, we're prepared to offer fair compensation for any improvements made to the land." His definition of fair became apparent when the first offers were made. Mere pennies on the dollar for years of hard work and improvement. Those who protested found Steele's men paying special attention to their properties, lounging menacingly near their homes and following their children as they walked to school. Morrison reserved particular venom for Isaiah and Mercy McKinnon. Those troublemakers up on the mountain, he spat during a meeting with his lawyers, loud enough for the entire hotel lobby to hear. "They've been organizing resistance, giving people ideas about standing together. Make sure they understand that their cooperation is not optional. But even as Morrison tightened his grip on the town, help arrived from an unexpected quarter. Reverend Samuel Morrison rode up the mountain trail one cold afternoon, his breath frosting in the winter air. The physical resemblance between the brothers ended at their features, where Thaddeus radiated cruel ambition. Samuel's face showed only compassion and concern. Isaiah and Mercy welcomed him into their warm kitchen, where he delivered his warning over cups of steaming coffee. "My brother means to take everything," Samuel said, his voice heavy with shame. "He's done this before in other territories. The mineral rights alone are worth millions to the railroad. He won't stop until he has what he wants." "But surely there must be some legal recourse," Mercy protested, her hand finding Isaiah's across the table. Samuel shook his head sadly. "His lawyers have found every loophole, every technical violation in the homesteading requirements. And even if you could fight him in court, he has enough money to keep the cases tied up for years. While his gunmen make life impossible for anyone who tries to stay," Isaiah added grimly. "I had to warn you," Samuel said, rising to leave despite our differences. "You've been true friends to me and to this community, but I fear you face an impossible choice now." As they watched the Reverend ride away, Isaiah and Mercy stood in their doorway, the home they had made together suddenly feeling fragile despite its sturdy log walls, the community they had helped build, the bonds forged through hardship and kindness. All of it teetered on the edge of destruction. "We could leave," Mercy whispered, though her heart rebelled at the thought. "Find somewhere else to start over." Isaiah's arm tightened around her shoulders as they watched the sun setting behind the mountains they both loved. The choice before them seemed impossible. Abandon everything they had built together or stay, and face Morrison's hired guns with little hope of victory. Below them, the lights of Copper Ridge began to twinkle in the gathering dusk, each one representing a family facing the same desperate decision. The weight of their responsibility to their newfound community pressed heavy on their hearts as darkness crept across the valley. Isaiah paced the worn floorboards of their bedroom each night, his footsteps echoing Mercy's worries. She would watch him from their bed, his broad shoulders tense with the weight of responsibility. During the day, their home became a gathering place for frightened families seeking guidance, their faces drawn with fear and uncertainty. "We can't let them drive us out," young Thomas Henderson insisted during one crowded meeting, his fists clenched in youthful determination. "We should fight and watch our sons die." Clara Jensen countered, her voice trembling. "There must be another way." Mercy kept the coffee pot full and fresh bread on the table as the debates raged. She noticed how Isaiah listened more than he spoke, his military experience from years ago weighing heavy in his silence. She knew he was counting the odds, their handful of farmers against Morrison's professional gunmen. The situation grew uglier by the day. Morrison's men began their campaign of terror with subtle warnings. Fences mysteriously cut livestock, scattered windows, broken in the night. But their tactics quickly escalated. Clara Jensen arrived one morning, tears streaming down her face. "They followed my children to school," she sobbed as Mercy held her. "Said it would be a shame if anything happened to them. Said I should convince my husband to take Morrison's offer." Isaiah's face darkened dangerously at this news. Mercy recognized the look in his eyes, the same protective fury that had driven him to bid for her at the auction. She caught his arm as he reached for his gun belt. "You can't," she whispered urgently. "That's exactly what they want, an excuse for violence. They'll kill you. And then who will help these people?" Reverend Samuel Morrison rode up frequently, bringing news from town and suggesting legal alternatives. "The territorial governor might intervene," he offered during one tense gathering. "If enough of us petition, that'll take months." Isaiah finally spoke, his voice heavy with certainty. "Morrison won't wait that long, and his lawyers will tie up any legal challenge for years." The Reverend's prediction proved true when Morrison's geological survey team completed their work. They confirmed rich veins of copper and silver running through the mountain, with the richest deposits directly beneath Isaiah's homestead. The news seemed to drive Morrison into a frenzy of determination. His final ultimatum came by official letter delivered to every family in the valley: 1 week to evacuate or face forcible removal. The paper trembled in Mercy's hands as she read it aloud to Isaiah. "You have to leave," Isaiah said that night, his voice rough with emotion. "Take the stage to Denver. I've arranged it with the station master. At least you'll be safe. Mercy's response came swift and certain. I won't abandon our home or these people who've become our family. She took his weathered hands in hers. Whatever comes, we face it together. The night before Morrison's deadline, families gathered in Isaiah's chapel. Children slept on blankets while adults spoke in hushed voices, drawing comfort from their unity. Some had already packed their wagons ready to flee at first light. Others were determined to stay come what may. Isaiah watched the sunrise paint the mountain peaks gold. Mercy beside him on their porch. Movement on the trail below caught his eye. Morrison's men approaching from multiple directions, their weapons clearly visible. They're surrounding the homestead, he said quietly. Through his spyglass, he could see other groups of gunmen positioning themselves near farms throughout the valley. Morrison meant to break them all simultaneously, giving no one a chance to help their neighbors. Mercy squeezed his hand. Whatever happens next, remember this. You showed me kindness when no one else would. You built this place dreaming of family, and now we have one. Not just us, but all these people who've become part of our lives. The sound of approaching hoofbeats grew louder as Morrison's men closed in. Inside the house, they could hear families stirring their voices, tense with fear and determination. The moment of final confrontation had arrived, forcing everyone to choose between standing together or losing everything they'd built. Isaiah looked at their home at the chapel he'd built with hope in his heart, at the community that had grown from Mercy's simple acts of kindness. Morrison's men were nearly at their gate now, and similar scenes were playing out at every homestead in the valley. The time for debate was over. They would all stand or fall together. Isaiah's military training screamed at him that the odds were impossible. Morrison had brought at least 20 hardened gunmen, while the homesteaders could barely muster half that number, most with little shooting experience beyond hunting. He watched Morrison's men taking positions around their property, his jaw clenched tight with frustration. We need to get everyone to the root cellar, he said grimly. At least the women and children will have some protection when no. Mercy's voice was quiet but firm. She stood at the window watching the scene below with an expression Isaiah had never seen before. There's another way, Mercy. These men aren't here to talk. They're killers hired too. They're men, she interrupted, turning to face him. Men who've eaten my cooking all winter, though they didn't know it. Men with families somewhere who've tasted the bread I left on their doorsteps during the coldest nights. Understanding dawned on Isaiah's face. The anonymous deliveries. You didn't just help our neighbors. I couldn't let anyone go hungry, she said simply. Not even Morrison's men. And now I mean to remind them of that. Before Isaiah could stop her, Mercy walked purposefully toward their bedroom. She emerged wearing the same dress she'd worn at the auction, now altered to fit her properly. The sight of it made Isaiah's heart clench, both with memory of that horrible day and fear for what she planned. You can't go down there, he protested. Morrison will heal what humiliate me. That's already been done right there in the town square. Her voice grew stronger. But I'm not that same frightened woman anymore. You taught me that, Isaiah. You in this community showed me what real strength looks like. Isaiah reached for her, but she gently caught his hand. Trust me, she whispered, like you trusted your heart that day at the auction. Before he could argue further, Mercy walked out their front door. Word spread quickly through the house. Families rushed to windows and porches, watching in stunned silence, as Mercy McKinnon walked calmly down the mountain trail toward Morrison's men. The gunmen seemed uncertain how to react to this unarmed woman approaching them. A few raised their rifles, but others shifted uncomfortably, recognizing her. Mercy didn't stop until she reached the town square, the very spot where she'd been auctioned months ago. Morrison himself rode forward, a sneer twisting his features. Come to beg for terms, Mrs. McKinnon. No, Mr. Morrison, Mercy's voice carried clearly in the morning air. I've come to talk about the difference between taking and earning. More townspeople emerged from their homes and businesses, drawn by the confrontation. Isaiah had moved closer, his heart pounding as he watched his wife face down the most dangerous man in the territory. You think because you have guns and money and lawyers, you can simply take whatever you want. Mercy continued, her quiet voice growing stronger with each word. But there are things you can't take, things that can only be earned, like respect, like community. She turned slowly, addressing the armed men surrounding her. Many of you found food on your doorsteps during the worst nights of winter, bread still warm from my oven, stew that would feed your whole family for days. You never knew who left it, but you ate it just the same. Several of Morrison's men lowered their weapons, recognition and discomfort clear on their faces. Mercy pressed on, her voice filled with passionate conviction. Look around you. These people you're threatening, their fathers and mothers just like yours. Those children watching from windows. They're someone's sons and daughters just like your own. When you return to your families, what will you tell them about this day? That you destroyed homes and broke apart families, or that you chose to protect them? Morrison's face darkened with rage. Arrest that woman, he shouted. She's inciting resistance. Two of his men stepped forward, then stopped. The older one, a grizzled veteran, slowly removed his gun belt and let it fall to the ground. No, sir, he said quietly. Not this time. Another followed suit, laying down his weapon. The momentum shifted palpably as more of Morrison's men began exchanging uncertain looks. They remembered the mysterious food deliveries during the bitter winter nights when their own supplies had run low. They saw the faces of children in windows, mothers clutching babies, fathers standing protective but unarmed. Morrison's seemingly unbreakable position had begun to crack, shattered not by bullets but by the quiet moral courage of a woman who had once stood trembling on these same boards, but now faced him with unwavering dignity. The courage of Mercy's stand rippled through the watching crowd like wind through prairie grass. One by one, families emerged from their homes drawn by an invisible force stronger than fear. Clara Jensen was the first to move, her children clinging to her skirts as she walked purposefully into the town square. I stand with Mercy McKinnon. Clara declared, her voice trembling but clear. She fed my babies when we had nothing left. The Hendersons came next. Old Mr. Henderson leaning on his son's arm. That woman's kindness kept me alive this winter, he announced, pointing a weathered finger at Morrison. Your threats can't match her goodness. Sarah Williams, heavy with child, stepped forward with her husband. Our unborn baby thrives because of Mercy's care. She said, we won't let you destroy what she and Isaiah have built. More families streamed into the square, forming a protective circle around Mercy. Their faces showed determination, born of shared struggle and mutual support. Morrison's remaining gunmen shifted uneasily, looking at the faces of people they lived alongside all winter. Isaiah appeared with several mountain families, his presence adding steel to the gathering crowd's resolve. He took his place beside Mercy, their shoulders touching in quiet solidarity. The crowd continued to grow as people arrived from outlying farms. Having heard the news, Morrison's hired guns began laying down their weapons in greater numbers. A young gunman named Peters removed his gun belt with shaking hands. My wife was sick in January, he said. Someone left medicine and hot soup on our porch every night for a week. It was you, wasn't it, Mrs. McKinnon? Mercy nodded gently. Everyone deserves care when they're suffering. Three more men dropped their weapons. Morrison's face twisted with rage as he watched his control dissolving. I'll burn every farm and homestead, he shouted. I'll destroy everything you've built. You'll have to destroy me first, brother. Reverend Samuel Morrison stepped through the crowd, his Bible held firmly in both hands. God's law stands higher than corporate greed. These good people have shown us the meaning of Christian charity, while you've shown only avarice. The Reverend's words struck deep. More gunmen stepped away from Morrison's side, leaving only his most hardened followers. But the crucial moment came when Jack Steele, Morrison's feared lead gunfighter, slowly unbuckled his gun belt. I've done things I ain't proud of, Steele said gruffly, but I won't harm folks who fed me when times were hard. He let his weapons fall into the dust. Find yourself another gun hand, Morrison. I'm done. Morrison's face had gone chalk white with fury. With trembling hands, he drew his own pistol and aimed it directly at Mercy. I'll end this right now, he snarled. Isaiah moved instantly to shield his wife, but he wasn't alone. The entire community surged forward as one, forming a human wall between Morrison and the woman who had shown them all the true meaning of strength. Mothers, fathers, children, and former gunmen stood shoulder to shoulder, their unity unshakable. Morrison's hand wavered as he faced not just his intended target, but an entire community bound together by something stronger than fear. He saw in their eyes not just defiance but pity, the final blow to his authority. His gun arm slowly lowered as he realized he had lost not just this confrontation, but any shred of moral standing. Looking around at the united faces before him, Morrison saw the complete collapse of his scheme. His remaining loyal men, sensing the change in tide, began backing away. The corporate baron who had arrived expecting to crush a scattered group of homesteaders found himself facing something he had never counted on. A community that had discovered its collective strength through shared hardship and mutual care. The town square fell silent as Morrison holstered his weapon. The same space that had once witnessed Mercy's humiliation now stood testament to her triumph. Not through force or wealth, but through the simple power of loving one's neighbors. The unified community remained standing together, their bonds forged in winter's trials now proven stronger than any threat of violence or greed. Thaddeus Morrison stormed into the telegraph office, his face flushed with rage. His trembling hands could barely hold the pencil as he scrolled an urgent message to the territorial authorities. Armed rebellion in Copper Ridge. Stop. Immediate intervention required. Stop homesteaders threatening railroad interests. Stop. What Morrison did not know was that his brother Samuel had already taken action. 3 days earlier, the Reverend had sent detailed documentation to Territorial Judge Harrison Wells, including evidence of forged bank documents and statements from families who had been forced into foreclosure through threats and manipulation. The town square remained tense as Morrison emerged from the telegraph office, a smug smile playing across his face. That expression froze when he heard the distinct sound of multiple horses approaching. Judge Wells himself rode at the head of a small group that included Federal Marshal Thomas Cooper and 2 deputies. Thaddeus Morrison, Judge Wells called out, his voice carrying across the square. I have some very interesting documents here regarding your activities in this territory. Morrison's face drained of color as he recognized his brother's handwriting among the papers the judge held. The evidence was damning. Falsified loan documents, forged signatures, and detailed accounts of how Morrison and banker Hodgins had systematically trapped families in impossible loan terms. Hodgins, seeing the federal authorities, broke immediately. It was all Morrison's idea, he stammered, stepping forward with shaking hands. I can show you everything. The fake foreclosure notices, the threatened evictions, all of it. Judge Wells dismounted, his expression grave, as he reviewed additional documents Hodgins provided. These properties were never legally available for seizure, he announced. The railroad's charter gives no authority for claiming established homesteads. The investigation moved swiftly. Marshal Cooper's deputies uncovered a trail of bribes Morrison had paid to local officials. Document after document revealed the scope of his crimes. Each piece of evidence further dismantling his carefully constructed scheme. Isaiah and Mercy stood together, watching as Morrison's empire crumbled. The judge ordered all seized properties returned to their rightful owners. The railroad company, represented by a hastily dispatched executive, publicly denounced Morrison's actions and promised fair negotiations for any land they might need. Mr. from McKinnon, Judge Wells said, turning to Isaiah, the mineral rights to your property are legally yours. The survey confirms significant copper and silver deposits. The railroad will need to compensate you fairly if they wish to access those resources. Marshal Cooper personally clasped the iron shackles around Morrison's wrists. The once powerful man seemed to shrink as he was led toward the waiting prison wagon. The gathered townspeople remained silent, their quiet dignity and victory speaking louder than any jeers or taunts could have. Mercy squeezed Isaiah's hand as they watched Morrison being taken away. Around them, families embraced and shed tears of relief. Clara Jensen's children danced in circles, while old Mr. Henderson offered up a quiet prayer of thanksgiving. What will we do with the mineral rights? Mercy asked softly. Isaiah looked around at their gathered neighbors. No longer just a community, but a true family forged in adversity. Whatever we decide, he answered, we'll decide together. These good people stood with us. Now we'll make sure our good fortune stands with them. The September sun cast golden light across Copper Ridge Town Square, now transformed with harvest decorations and festive bunting. Where cruel mockery had once echoed, joyful music filled the air. Children darted between hay bales and apple-bobbing stations, their laughter a healing balm over old wounds. Mercy McKinnon stood at the center of it all, her capable hands arranging platters of preserved venison and fresh baked bread on long tables. She paused to watch Clara Jensen, now her dearest friend and business partner, directing a group of women setting up their food cooperative's display of canned goods and preserves. Still can't believe how much has changed in 6 months, Clara said, joining Mercy. Remember when we were all too proud or scared to help each other? The Lord works in mysterious ways, Mercy replied, adjusting her Sunday best dress. Speaking of changes, how's the new preservation facility coming along? Orders are pouring in from 3 territories now. Clara beamed. Who knew your logging camp recipes would turn into such a business? Isaiah approached looking uncomfortable but handsome in his formal suit. As unofficial sheriff, he'd spent the morning ensuring the festival's security, but his real joy came from watching his wife's happiness. Reverend Samuel's ready whenever you are, he said softly. The newly constructed church gleamed with fresh white paint and polished windows. Inside, every pew was filled with familiar faces, families whose lives had been touched by Isaiah and Mercy's generosity during that desperate winter. The renewal of their vows felt different from their first quiet ceremony. This was a celebration of not just their love, but the community's rebirth. Reverend Samuel Morrison stood before them, his kind eyes twinkling. 6 months ago, these two taught us that true wealth isn't measured in gold or silver, but in how we care for one another, he began. Their marriage has blessed not just them, but our entire community. Through the church windows, they could see the railroad tracks that had brought legitimate prosperity instead of displacement. The mining operation on Isaiah's land now employed many local men at fair wages, while the food cooperative ensured no family would face hunger again. After the ceremony, the festival reached full swing. Couples twirled to fiddle music in the same square where the spinster auction had once stood. Children played tag around market stalls filled with fresh produce and preserved goods bearing the McKinnon and Jensen Provisions label. As evening approached, Isaiah and Mercy stood on the newly built gazebo, watching their chosen family celebrate. Former outcasts now served on the town council. People who had once jeered now sought Mercy's advice on everything from food preservation to community matters. I received a letter from Samuel today, Mercy said quietly. He visited Thaddeus in territorial prison again. Isaiah nodded. How's his brother doing, finding his way to redemption slowly? Samuel says he's showing real remorse, helping other prisoners learn to read. The setting sun painted the Medicine Bow Mountains in shades of purple and gold. Isaiah wrapped his arm around Mercy's waist, remembering that first difficult wagon ride up to his homestead. Who would have thought your preserved foods and my hunting would build all this? Mercy leaned against him, watching Clara's children play with the other youngsters. Love and service, she said simply. They change everything. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.